Good morning. I need you to stop what you're doing right now because what I'm about to share with you could be the most important conversation you have this year. Not just for yourself, but for someone you love. Most people assume that when an elderly person begins to decline, it's obvious. They imagine a dramatic moment, a fall, a hospital visit, a sudden diagnosis. But here's what they never tell you. The real warning signs show up months, sometimes an entire year before anything catastrophic happens. They're quiet, they're subtle, and most families miss them completely until it's too late. I'm Dr. James Carter, and after more than 2 decades working in geriatric medicine and end-of-life care, I've sat across from hundreds of families who said the same thing. We just didn't see it coming. But the truth is, the body often does show us. We just don't always know how to listen. Today, I want to slow things down and walk you through something important, not to create fear, but to create awareness. Because awareness gives families something incredibly valuable in medicine. Time. Time to understand, time to adjust, time to be present with someone they love in a way that truly matters. Before we go further, I want you to think about this personally. If you're watching this for a parent, a spouse, or even yourself, you're not alone. Many of my patients' families have told me they wish they had known what to look for sooner. And that's exactly why this conversation matters. There is one large research review I often refer to when discussing this topic with families. A study following thousands of adults over the age of 70 found that in the final year of life, distinct physical, emotional, and behavioral shifts were present in a large majority of individuals. What was most concerning wasn't the changes themselves, but how often they were misinterpreted as normal aging. That misunderstanding is what I want to help correct today. Let's begin with something many families notice, but rarely connect to anything serious. The first sign is a noticeable change in appetite. Not the occasional skipped meal, but a steady and ongoing loss of interest in eating. Families often tell me things like, they just don't enjoy food like they used to, or they say they're not hungry anymore, even when their favorite meals are served. If you're over 60, this may surprise you because appetite isn't just about taste or preference. It's deeply tied to how the brain and gut communicate. As we age, those signals can weaken. Hormones that regulate hunger become less responsive, and digestion itself slows down. In many cases, the body is literally sending fewer "I need fuel" signals to the brain. But here's what makes this more important than just aging. When appetite continues to decline over weeks and weight begins to drop unintentionally, the body starts operating in a kind of energy conservation mode. It begins prioritizing essential functions like heart and brain activity while reducing energy elsewhere. Many of my patients' families describe this moment as confusing and emotional. One daughter once told me, "It felt like my mother was slowly stepping away from me, even though she was still right there." You're not alone if you've noticed this in someone you care about. And it's important to bring it to a physician's attention early, not to assume it's just getting older. Sometimes simple nutritional support or medical evaluation can make a meaningful difference in comfort and strength. Now let's move to something that is often mistaken for personality change. The second sign is a gradual withdrawal from social connection. This doesn't mean someone prefers a quiet evening once in a while. That can be completely normal. What I'm referring to is a clear, consistent pulling away from people, activities, and routines that once brought them joy. I've had families tell me, "He stopped calling his friends," or "She doesn't want to go to church anymore and she used to love it." At first, it can look like mood changes or even mild depression, and sometimes that is part of it. But medically, there's something deeper happening in many cases. Research from aging and neuroscience studies has shown that long-term social isolation doesn't just affect mood. It affects the body at a cellular level. Chronic loneliness increases stress hormones like cortisol, and over time, that can impact sleep, immunity, and even cardiovascular health. If you're over 60, this may resonate in a very real way. Connection isn't just emotional, it's biological. We are wired for it. I once cared for a gentleman who had been the life of every gathering in his neighborhood. His wife told me that over just a few months, he went from planning community events to barely leaving his chair. She said something I'll never forget. It was like the lights were still on, but nobody was home anymore. What families often miss is that this withdrawal is not simply a choice. It can be a sign that the body and mind are under strain in ways that aren't immediately visible. Encouraging gentle social interaction, short visits, familiar environments, or simply sitting together without pressure can sometimes help more than people realize. Presence matters more than conversation in those moments. Now let's talk about a sign that often confuses families the most because it doesn't look like decline at all on the surface. The third sign is a shift in how a person relates to memory and time. Instead of focusing on the present or future, they begin talking more about the past. Not in a casual way, but in a deeply reflective, sometimes repetitive way. Old memories become more vivid than recent experiences. They may speak about childhood as if it were yesterday. They may bring up people who have long passed away with a sense of closeness that feels very real to them. Families often describe this as confusing or like they're living in another time. Neurologically, this is linked to how the brain organizes memory when cognitive energy is changing. The brain naturally holds on to long-established memories because they require less processing than new information. It is, in a sense, moving toward what is most familiar and stable. I remember a patient who would often talk about her childhood home in extraordinary detail, even describing the color of curtains she hadn't seen in over 70 years. Her son was worried at first, thinking she was losing her grip on reality. But what he eventually learned was that these memories brought her comfort and grounding. When he stopped correcting her and started listening instead, something shifted in their relationship. Their conversations became calmer, more meaningful, and more present in a different way. If you're experiencing this with someone, I want you to hear this carefully. Sometimes the most healing thing you can do is not pull someone back into your world, but step into theirs with compassion. But before we move on, take a moment to reflect. Have you noticed any of these changes in someone you love? If so, you are not overthinking it. You're paying attention. And that alone can make a real difference. And if you found this helpful, consider liking, commenting, and subscribing to Dr. James Carter Health, so more families can find this information when they need it most. Now let's continue with the remaining signs, and I want you to keep in mind something important as we go deeper. These are not prediction tools in the way people sometimes assume when they hear discussions like this online. In real clinical practice, no single sign determines anything on its own. What matters is pattern, progression, and context. These observations are meant to help families become more attentive, not anxious. With that in mind, let's move forward. The fourth sign is a change in breathing patterns, especially when a person is at rest or asleep. Families often describe it in very simple terms at first. He seems to pause between breaths, or her breathing sounds different at night. It's subtle enough that many people hesitate to bring it up, thinking it might just be normal aging or sleep-related changes. But breathing is one of the most tightly regulated functions in the human body. It is controlled by networks in the brainstem that constantly respond to oxygen and carbon dioxide levels. When the body is under significant strain, or when certain neurological or cardiac systems begin to change, that regulation can become less steady. One pattern clinicians watch for is called periodic breathing, where the rhythm of breathing becomes uneven. There may be cycles of deeper breaths followed by shallower ones, sometimes with brief pauses in between. Families may notice it most when their loved one is sleeping beside them or during quiet rest in a chair. If you're over 60 or caring for someone who is, this is not something to panic about, but it is something to take seriously enough to evaluate. Studies in geriatric and cardiology research have found that new or worsening breathing irregularities in older adults can sometimes correlate with underlying cardiac or neurological stress. That doesn't automatically mean something catastrophic, but it does mean the body is asking for closer attention. I remember a couple I worked with in my clinic. The wife mentioned almost casually that her husband had started breathing funny at night. She almost didn't bring it up because he had no other complaints. No pain, no shortness of breath during the day, nothing dramatic. But that small observation led to further evaluation. What we found allowed us to intervene early, adjust his treatment plan, and significantly improve his stability over the following months. And what she told me later stayed with me. I almost didn't say anything because I thought it was nothing, but it was something. That is often how this sign shows up. Quietly, indirectly, through someone who is paying close attention. Now let's move to something that families often interpret emotionally rather than medically. The fifth sign is a noticeable shift in engagement with life. This can look like a loss of initiative, where a person stops making plans, stops expressing preferences, and begins to respond to life rather than participate in it. They may say things like, "I don't really care," more often, even about things that once mattered deeply. They may stop asking questions about family events, stop planning ahead, or show little interest in decisions they used to take pride in. It is very important to understand that this is not simply giving up, and it is not the same as ordinary sadness. In many older adults, especially those with underlying medical conditions, this can reflect changes in energy regulation within the brain and body. Planning, decision-making, and curiosity are all energy-dependent processes. When overall physiological reserve declines, the brain often conserves energy by reducing forward-focused thinking. Families sometimes describe this change in heartbreaking ways. One adult child told me, "It was like my father was still sitting with us, but he had stopped leaning into life." What makes this particularly difficult is that it can be mistaken for stubbornness, depression, or even personality change. But medically, it deserves careful attention because it often appears alongside other subtle physical or emotional changes. I want to be very clear here. This is not about labeling someone as near the end of anything. It is about recognizing when someone may need more support, more medical evaluation, or simply more understanding from the people around them. Now, I want to step back for a moment and bring all of this together, because individually, each sign can have many explanations. But when patterns begin to cluster, appetite changes, withdrawal, memory shifts, breathing changes, and loss of initiative, that is when families should pay closer attention and seek guidance from a healthcare professional. In geriatrics, we often talk about functional trajectory. That simply means how a person is functioning over time, not just in a single moment. Some people stabilize, some improve with treatment, and others gradually decline due to chronic illness, frailty, or age-related changes. Understanding that trajectory helps families prepare, support, and respond appropriately. And I want to emphasize something here that is often missed in conversations like this online. None of these signs mean that someone cannot still live meaningfully. Even in advanced age, even with serious health challenges, quality of life can still be deeply preserved with the right care, attention, and emotional support. I have seen families transform difficult periods into some of the most connected times of their lives simply by shifting their focus from fixing everything to being present with what is happening right now. One son once told me after his mother passed, "The last few months were the hardest, but also the most honest and loving time I ever had with her." That is something I hear more often than people expect. So if you are recognizing some of these changes in someone you love, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. I want you to feel informed. Because information gives you options. It allows you to talk to doctors more confidently, to ask better questions, and to advocate more effectively. And if you are the one experiencing some of these changes yourself, I want to say this gently and clearly. Aging brings change, but change does not erase dignity, independence, or meaning. With proper care and support, many people continue to live fully engaged lives, even with health challenges. Before we finish, I want to leave you with something practical. If you notice 2 or more of these signs persisting over weeks or months, it is appropriate to schedule a comprehensive medical evaluation. Not out of fear, but out of responsibility and care. Primary care physicians, geriatric specialists, and cardiology teams can often identify treatable causes that significantly improve comfort and stability. Now, as we come to the end of this conversation, I want to thank you for taking the time to engage with something that is not always easy to hear, but deeply important to understand. If this helped you gain clarity, please consider liking this video so it can reach other families who may need it. And if you want more conversations like this, subscribe to Dr. James Carter Health. I share evidence-based, compassionate guidance designed to help older adults and their families navigate health with confidence and dignity. And I would genuinely like to hear from you in the comments. Have you noticed any of these changes in someone you care about? Sometimes sharing your experience helps others realize they are not alone in what they are seeing. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next conversation.